This is the Sweet Song Podcast where we unwrap your favorite songs. I'm your host, Kristi York Wooten, and on this episode, Colin Blunstone from the Zombies. This is Kristi York Wooten, and this is the Sweet Song Podcast. And today I'm super excited to have Colin Blunstone from the Zombies, legendary singer for the band, one of my favorite voices in all of rock and roll. So very excited to talk to Colin. The Zombies are featured in a new documentary called Hung Up on a Dream, which is a wonderful journey from the earliest days of the band really to the present and all of the ups and downs. And I know that that one hopefully is up for some awards. And Colin, welcome to a Sweet Song Podcast.
Well, thank you, Kristi. Thank you so much.
So what are your thoughts on the documentary being out there? Was it kind of a vulnerable position to be talking about so many aspects of your life and career?
Yeah, I think it is. It does put you in a slightly vulnerable situation. I guess it depends how much you want to reveal of yourself, really. It's up to you. But Robert Schwartzman, the director, is a fine director. And he's also a very easy person to talk to. And we all spoke to him for hours on end, much longer than you see in the documentary. And you just find yourself opening up to him naturally, really. And then perhaps sometimes it can be, when you see your whole life concertinaed into an hour and a half's documentary and you're seeing it on the screen, it's quite an emotional experience actually watching it. Certainly the first time I watched it, it was very exciting, but very emotional.
It's also emotional as not only a fan of the Zombies, but just anyone who knows music history of the last 50 years and following your journey and seeing, kind of what could have been, but also what amazing things did happen and, how Odyssey and Oracle was rediscovered and all of those. But one of the scenes that I love is the opening scene, and it's you and Rod Argent, who plays keyboards and writes songs for the Zombies. You're in this church up by the organ pipes, and he's playing and your voice, and it's so beautiful. And then it goes right into the opening scenes of you all as boys, and you are called the boy who sings by your neighbor. And I wanted to ask you, when you were young, I know you love music, but did you realize what a gift you had? Did you kind of feel that you needed to do something with your voice?
No, not at all. I love singing. I've always loved music and I love singing. And I used to sing as I was walking along the road, I would always be singing. And as it says in the documentary, my neighbors, before they knew my name, they just called me the boy who sings. Even when I joined the band, I joined as a guitarist, and it just happened. Rod Argent heard me singing to myself, as I always did. And he just said to me, look, if you'll be the lead singer. It was a real shock because he was going to be the lead singer, but he was a very, very fine keyboard player. And he said, if you'll be the lead singer, I'll play keyboards in the band. And that was at the end of the first rehearsal. It was funny. It was a big change. I went from being rhythm guitarist to lead vocalist within about an hour and a half. And so it was a big change. But from there on in, there was one other change in the personalities in the band. But essentially, that was the Zombies. We weren't called the Zombies then. The bass player who had introduced me to this setup, he left. He wanted to be a doctor, and he ended up being a doctor in Canada. And because he wanted to be a doctor, he had to do a lot of extra schoolwork. And he just didn't have the time to do rehearsals. And Chris White came in and took his place. So that was the one change in the Zombies. And the whole time from us being amateur and professional, there was only one change. So after that first rehearsal, I was pushed forward to be the lead singer. That had never, ever crossed my mind. I've always been quite an introverted, quite shy person, which might sound strange, taking that into account, the career I've pursued in the last 60 odd years. But I never for one moment thought of myself as a lead vocalist.
Let's go back to the moment in the documentary when the Zombies are formed and you're in this, for lack of a better word, I can't remember the exact name, but it was like a battle of the bands, and there's 100 bands across Britain that were participating, and the Zombies are, we're in a group of 10, I guess, and you pass the first heat. And then all of a sudden you've won this competition that puts your name up there with the Beatles. So tell me a little bit about that's another transition for you, not, first, becoming the lead singer and then suddenly thrust into this top musical groups of England.
Well, it was an extraordinary thing that happened. We were entered into this competition. Not really, I don't think anybody seriously thought we were going to win. It was just a bit of fun. And there were 10 bands a night for 10 weeks. So, yes, it was 100 bands. We won the heat. I mean, I was amazed very pleasantly. I don't want to talk us down. I mean, there was a lot of wonderful players in the Zombies, but we'd always probably, I think we just thought of ourselves as a local band of young teenagers. And we won the first heat. And then, yeah, you're quite right. We won the final. And I think that's the first time I dared to think that there might be a way forward for us. I mean, I knew we'd got some great players in the band, but it just seems such a stretch of the imagination to go from being in a local band to think that you could travel around the world as a professional musician being in a professional band. But when we won that competition, I did think maybe there's just a chance. And we got an opportunity because of winning that competition to make a record. And again, there's another thing that happened. I had no idea it was going to happen. Producer, we've been introduced to someone called Ken Jones. And he said in a pep talk about 2 weeks before the session, you could always write something for this session. And then he moved on and talked about other things. It wasn't a big deal. But Rod Argent and Chris White went away and wrote two really fine songs. I had no idea they could write songs. It was a total surprise to me. And Rod came back with this song, She's Not There, which we recorded both of their songs. You Make Me Feel Good was the B side. She's Not There was the A side. And it went to #1 in Cashbox. And it was a big hit all around the world. I think it was about #2 or #3 in Billboard. A huge hit all around the world. And suddenly we'd gone from being a local amateur band into being a professional hit band. And we were traveling around the world playing on tours with artists that had been our heroes. So it was a very quick switch. But I think when you're a teenager, you can do these things. You just accept, okay, we have a hit record. We're going to America. We're going around the world, and you just get on with it. But looking back, there were some very big changes in a very short period of time.
I love how Hung Up on a Dream is the theme of the documentary, but also you didn't really talk about success at the time. It was such a whirlwind that you were just caught up in it. So it's kind of like the dream that like you're along the ride, you don't know where it's taking you, you're young. And I think that's what leads to some of the things that happened later, of course, with your management and being taken advantage of by promoters. But then now how kind of that dream of the Zombies is back in full force. I mean, starting with the 40th anniversary of, Odyssey and Oracle, how it just picked back up, at least in terms of listeners and fans. It was like that dream never went away. But did you always think of rock music as your dream? And once you were on the ride, were you still dreaming? Or did you wake up from the dream?
Well, I think in the first place, when we were an amateur band, I thought that's what we would do. We would just be an amateur band. When we became a professional band, I think most people at that time, so we're talking about 1964, it's a long, long time ago. I think most people thought that a band's lifespan would probably be about 3 or 4 years. And I was no different. I thought this was going to be a wonderful adventure with my friends playing the music I loved and traveling around the world. What more could you ask for? Just a wonderful adventure, as I said. But I thought it would probably have a quite a short lifespan. But I wasn't alone. I think most people thought like that. But it didn't work out that way. Along with a lot of other bands, there was a lifetime's career ahead of us in the music business. I wasn't expecting that at all. But it has been a bumpy road, as you alluded to. There have been a lot of ups and downs. And this album, particularly this album, Odyssey and Oracle, has probably kept the Zombies name alive. And again, it was kind of a surprise to me when Rod Argent and I started playing again in 1999. I think both of us thought that the Zombies were pretty much forgotten. And we both had solo careers in the UK at least. And so we could play a full set without playing any zombie tunes. I think we probably played a couple of zombie songs. And we were amazed that people were asking, continue, more zombie songs, until after it took us a few years. I think maybe we're a bit slow to catch on with these things, but after a few years, we realized we were playing a zombie set. And at that point, we talked to the other original members and said, guys, look, we're playing a zombie set. It would seem only logical that we would call this band the Zombies, a second incarnation, if you like, of the Zombies. And they gave us our blessing. And so after about 7 years of Rod and I playing again under different, I think we were Colin Blunstone and Rod Argent to start with, and it was of the Zombies, and then the Zombies featuring Colin Blunstone and Rod Argent. After about 7 or 8 years, we became the Zombies again. Obviously, it's a slightly different lineup, but it's really the main writer and the main lead singer. So I think we felt that it was quite honest to do this, to describe ourselves as the Zombies. We're playing a Zombies program, and we've got two of the original Zombies in there. And it went really well. No one could have thought. We started off, Rod and I'd got 6 gigs left in a concert tour, and my keyboard player kept dropping out. And I phoned Rod. I was absolutely desperate. Would he consider doing 6 concerts to the end of this tour? And he said, he's a very successful producer at the time. And he said to me, sure, I'll do these 6 dates, but I don't really want to get back on the road full time. But he enjoyed it so much that those 6 dates grew into 20. And none of us were expecting that. That's one of the things about the music business. It's full of surprises. You never know what's going to happen next. And it's certainly been true for me anyway. Most of the changes, the successes, and some of the failures as well have come completely by surprise. I wasn't expecting them. And so it keeps you on your toes, at least. It does keep you on your toes.
So can you take us back to your lowest moment musically in your career and your highest? Maybe you haven't had your highest yet, but
It'd be nice to think that is the case. I mean, in terms of lowest, I think when the Zombies finished, it was it was pretty bad. I've said this before in interviews, but I didn't have a plan B. I didn't know what I was going to do. So when the Zombies finished, um, I remember driving home after we had a meeting where it just seemed like the band was going nowhere, and it seemed to us it was time to start new projects. And I was driving home and thinking, I think I was 22, thinking, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I had no idea. My life had been totally the Zombies. That was it. I mean, possibly I should have thought of what I would do when the band finished, but I hadn't. So that was very, very bad. There was another time in the 80s, I think, I'd had quite a few hit singles in the UK and Europe, never in the States, but over here I had. And things just seemed to run out of steam. I just finished. I was in a band that had been a bit successful. They certainly earned some money anyway, and that had run its course. And suddenly, again, I was back in that same situation of 19, whatever it was, 68. So now it's about 85 or 86, and I had nothing. The phone wasn't ringing. I had no plans. That was another low point, really was. But after that, things did start to pick up. And as eventually, as I said to you, Rod and I got back together again. And then it was just a steady increase of success all the time, maybe just step by step, baby steps. But we went from playing rooms in the back of pubs to small theatres, big theatres, festivals, arenas. We played the whole spectrum of venues once we got that band rolling. And again, no one was expecting it. It was wonderful. It was a great experience. I think that was the most exciting time in my career, seeing that band grow. And without a hit single, there was no hit single. It was just word of mouth. And the band, it really grew over those years. And it was so, so rewarding. It really was.
do you have songs that not zombie songs, but other artists or things that you played? You mentioned driving after the Zombies breaking up, driving somewhere at 22. Do you remember any of the songs? This is the Sweet Song Podcast, so we like to talk about songs specifically. Any songs that have sort of been there for you that you've gone back to? Not necessarily zombie songs, but
No,
other artists that have helped carry you through some of these times?
well, I think, we were huge Beatles fans, so anything by the Beatles would have lifted me, certainly, um, at the time. And still, I'm a huge Beach Boys fan. I think they're two of the biggest bands that ever were. So songs at that time, 1968, songs by them would have lifted me, absolutely. The Beatles just seemed to record track after track they're just wonderful, and particularly with the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds. I think it was successful in the UK before it was in the States, funnily enough, with them being an American band. But Pet Sounds was a huge album for me at that time. So if I heard anything on a Beatles album or from Pet Sounds, that would immediately lift my spirits, definitely.
You've mentioned you, as a younger person, loved Little Richard and Ricky Nelson and, Buddy Holly. Do you know some of those songs you would like to share with us that really got you going? Little Richard, of course, from here in Georgia, got his start playing in Macon and Atlanta.
Well, I always quote the people that I was interested in that led me to join a local band, which became the Zombies. And I think of the three greats of rock and roll, which would be, for me, Elvis, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry. And with Little Richard, anything he sang, Long Tall Sally, Lucille, the girl, I remember seeing The Girl Can't Help It. I saw a clip of that film on TV. I thought it was just phenomenal. With Chuck Berry, Sweet Little 16, I can remember all of his hits, Elvis, right from Hound Dog and Heartbreak Hotel. These were just incredibly, so different, these tracks, and really, really exciting. Then later on, Buddy Holly, and a big one for me was Ricky Nelson. And I was singing a Ricky Nelson song when Rod Argent said to me, "You be the lead singer in the Zombies." And I'm pretty sure it was It's Late. It's definitely Ricky Nelson. And I'm pretty sure it was It's Late. And so that was my audition for being the lead singer in the Zombies. That changed my life.
And you all toured with a lot of American groups and R&B groups in your early part of your career, and I know the documentary talks about Patti LaBelle and some others, and that you all were nervous to kind of when everybody would go around and sing a cappella, and that you and Rod sang "If I Fell" by the Beatles in front of all these amazing soul singers, and how did that go? Do you have memories of that?
I remember fear, anxiety. It was with Patti LaBelle, and that was the Murray the K Christmas show in 1964. And there was Benny King, the Shangri-Las, the Shirelles. There were about 14 acts on that show, and you sang just two or three songs, and we had to follow Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. She had a wonderful singing group with her. Uh, so there were 6 or 7 shows a day, but they were compressed. You only did two or three songs. But every time we had to follow them. That was our first time in the States. So that was a bit nerve-wracking. And then when we had to sing, that was on tour that we were going around the States in a bus. And there were some wonderful singers on there. And a lot of the time we drove through the night and they would sing through the night. Wonderful, wonderful voices. And eventually we were just listening in awe. And they eventually just pointed to us and said, "Okay, it's your turn now. What are you going to do?" And we had what we were going to, I don't know. And we had actually sung If I Fell a few times together. And that's what we did. And I think they appreciated us having a go. We did it quite well, I think. Rod's a really good harmony singer, and it really brings a song to life when you've got a great harmony going. After that, they accepted us as one of the gang. I think we were accepted.
The making of Odyssey and Oracle, of course, which happened at Abbey Road Studios following a Beatles recording session, I think, where a Mellotron and some other things were left behind. But and I know you all revisited the studio when you were making the documentary, but what else do you recall of that time? Are there any other anecdotes from the recording sessions that you can let us know about?
Well, it was very, very pressured because we were only given a recording budget of £1,000. So, 12 or $1,300. And even in that time, it was a very small recording budget, especially to be in a studio like Abbey Road, which was one of the most expensive studios in the country, if not the world. So we had to do everything very, very fast. We rehearsed extensively in a little village hall out in the country. And when we got to the studio, we knew what the songs were. We knew what key they were in. We knew the arrangement. We just were looking for a performance. So we had to record really, really quickly. And one thing I often say is in those days, it's all changed. Abbey Road Studio 3 is very different now. It's been completely remodeled. But you used to have to go out of the control room when you're going to do a vocal, walk down a corridor and go in another door into the studio and do the vocal. Because we were really short of money, I used to run to start with. I would run from the control room. It's just a story against myself. I'd run from the control room, down the corridor, into the studio, get in front of the mic, and of course, I'm out of breath. So I'm going, I have to wait before I can sing. So I quickly learned that the running was a waste of time. You might just as well walk, and then when you get in front of the mic, you can start singing. I was trying to save time and money by running, but that was a complete waste. But a lot of recording that album was all around trying to get the recording done within the terms of the budget. We just had to. I mean, famously, there's a song called Changes. If you're looking at an album, it's the first track on side two, I believe. And it's the only track that we all sang on a big block harmony. We were, because particularly Hugh and Paul Atkinson didn't sing on tracks normally, we were all standing by the piano keyboard to get our note, to get our starting note so that we could all sing. But Abbey Road was very strict in those days. You had to work from 10 till 1, then you had to stop and have lunch. 2 till 5, 7 till 10. There's no choice about this. You had to stop. We'd overrun a little bit trying to get this harmony right. And we're standing around the piano, and two guys come in brown long coats. They were the guys that used to move stuff around. Again, very regimented. They had brown coats. The tech guys had white coats. And all the engineers had collars and tie. It was very formal. We're standing at the piano, and these guys want to move this piano into another studio. The red light's on, we're singing, we're recording, and they just move the piano while we're actually singing round the piano. They move it out of Studio 3. But because we had such a small budget, we just kept singing. We just ignored them completely and just kept singing. And I like to think that you can hear the piano being moved out on the track. I'm not sure that you can, but it always conjures up that picture to me anyway, these guys coming in and taking the piano while we're singing. So a lot of recording Odyssey and Oracle was all to do with trying to record it as quickly as we could. And in the end, we just managed to do it.
One of the things I like to think about bands, of course, nowadays on the charts, you have a lot more solo artists, kind of like in the late 50s, early 60s, you had a lot of crooners and a lot of solo acts, and now we're back to the solo acts with bands being obviously, there are still some young people forming bands, but bands at that time, I think for the post-war era, especially in England, I think were kind of little alliances, little, groups of friends banding together to collaborate. And it took on a deeper meaning. I know that you all, have been friends for so long, but tell me about, like, friendship and music. I feel like friendship is a part of making music when you're working with people that long, and it really becomes, maybe after so many decades, the leading aspect of your working relationship is just the friendship.
Well, it can be. It's funny when you see singing groups that are family singing groups. There's usually something special. I mean, the Everly Brothers would be a prime example. There's usually something very special about that. And in another way, it's I think it's special when a band are friends, With the Zombies, we went through our formative years together from 15 until 22. We went through quite a lot in that period, and they'll always be special friends to me. And I think you're quite right. It does it does add something to the music when there's a deep personal connection. Absolutely. Having said that, I didn't know any of the guys before our first rehearsal. I knew one. He was the guy who asked me to come along, and I sat behind him at school. We sat in alphabetical order. It's quite a strict school. So I had to sit where I was, and he had to sit there. And he knew Rod Argent. I had never met Rod Argent, didn't go to my school. This guy sat in front of me, and he said, "You've got a guitar, haven't you?" And I said, "I have, actually." And he said, "Do you want to be in a band?" That's how. So I knew him, but I didn't know the other guys. But I certainly grew to know them because we worked together for such a long time. And with Rod Argent and Chris White, I've worked with them off and on for my whole life.
How is Rod doing?
He's doing very well. As you probably know, he had a stroke just over a year ago, and he's doing really well. And he's writing, and I think he's adamant he wants to record and keep writing, but he's not going to tour anymore. And I think he's probably made the right decision there. I think your health protecting your health should always come first. And so he's not going to tour anymore, but he hopefully is going to keep writing and recording. But in himself, he's very well. I'm rather envious at the moment because he's down at the coast and he's going to be down there for a few weeks, and I'm sure he's going to be look extremely healthy. He's got a lovely apartment that looks out over the sea with a oh, I don't know if you call it the same thing, a balcony that you can sit out on. So he's looking over the sea. And I think he's going to look extremely healthy the next time I see him. I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again.
That's good. I know you've mentioned that in many cases you've called yourself an introvert or said that in sometimes you didn't have confidence on stage. And now all these years later, can you look back and say that you found the confidence you always wanted on stage? I mean, you have an incredible range and vocals, your voice that can go from this beautiful, soft, breathy to a very strong, rock and roll voice that can hit those really high notes and hold the notes. But do you ever feel like you got the confidence that you always wanted to? It looks different to us in the audience. It looks
Yeah,
amazing for you. Do you think you did?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm a very different person to particularly professionally, being on stage. I'm a very different person to how I was then. But I mean, the thing is, I didn't see myself as a stage person. I was even amazed that I ever got on a stage. I didn't see myself as a stage person. I didn't see myself as a lead singer, but the more you do it, the more you can do. So I've certainly grown as a performer, and I feel much more comfortable on stage now than I did. But it was a little bit difficult. I was helped by in those early amateur gigs that we did, people usually danced. When you played music, they danced. So they weren't looking at you. You just played and they danced. But once you get a bit of success, people are sitting down and they're looking at you. That's a whole different ballgame. And of course, it all becomes much more important. And especially if you've got a bit of success, people know the songs that you're singing. So, the pressure's on. You've got to get it right. So, of course, you've got to get it right. And as soon as you've got to get it right, it becomes more easy to go wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's it's just a little bit of pressure that comes on to particularly professional artists. But I mean, you learn to live with it. And I'm much more comfortable with it now than I used to be. In fact, I feel pretty relaxed on stage now, really, to be absolutely honest.
We'll have just a couple more questions. One is some things that people might not know, which is that, you know, you were at one point called Neil MacArthur.
The Zombies finished, and I think actually they finished in '67, but the album came out a bit later. I'd taken, I just, the three non writers in the band were absolutely broke. I was a non-writer. I was absolutely broke. And I had to get a job. I took the first job I could get. It was in an office in the center of London. And it wasn't till Time of the Season was going up the charts that people started offering me opportunities to sing again. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go through all that again, to be honest. But a producer called Mike Hurst, who recorded the early Cat Stevens records, big hits in the UK. I'm not sure if they were hits in the States. I Love My Dog, Matthew and Son, I'm going to get me a gun. They were three big hits in the UK. So his producer, Mike Hurst, rang me and said, I'd really like you to record again. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to get back in the business because I'd found the whole thing of the band finishing very traumatic. But he said, look, I'll get Olympic Studios, which is at the time was a very fine studio. The Stones famously recorded there. And he said, come along after the office. I do not day in the office. And I'll record some tracks and you just put your voice on it and we'll see what happens. And eventually one of those tracks, it was suggested that I re-record She's Not There, which it was a little bit of a strange thing, but I didn't know if this was going to happen or not. It was just an experiment. So we recorded She's Not There, and somebody came up with the idea of this name, Neil MacArthur. I don't know where the name came from. The record was put out and it was a small hit. So I was stuck with the name. It was like a top 30 single in this country. So I was stuck with the name Neil MacArthur for a year or so until I started recording again under my real name with Rod Argent and Chris White producing me my first solo album. And in this country, again, there was a big hit on that album. But the Neil McCarthy thing was bizarre because people would call me Neil, and I didn't know if they were saying a noun or a verb. So I didn't know if they were saying my name or if they were asking me. Obviously, I wasn't used to being called Neil. And so it was a sort of a chance thing that happened with perhaps without a great deal of thought going into it because I didn't even know if a record was going to be released at the time. I
And
forgot.
when you went out solo after that and you were Colin Blunstone again, you actually toured with early versions of ELO, right?
Was on their first tour. Yeah, I just had a hit with a Denny Lane song in this country, and so I was second on the bill to ELO on their first tour, which was fantastic. I mean, they were. It was an early version, but they were still great, and it was so new what they were doing, and I actually knew what I was doing as well because I was touring with a rock band and a string quartet, which is very unusual. So it was a good tour. I enjoyed that very much. That was my first solo tour. Yeah, with ELO.
We have to do our most important question, which is on the Sweet Song podcast. I want to know the Zombies song that you feel is either your favorite or you have the most special memories of. And I know it's hard to choose, but we need to find one to talk about. Which one will that be? Which will be your sweet song?
Well, I think I always go back to She's Not There because, firstly, it's a timeless classic. It's a wonderful song written by Rod Argent. And secondly, it changed all our lives forever. One day we were an amateur band from St. Albans, just north of London. And the next day we were an internationally successful professional band with a worldwide hit. And it's all because of She's Not There.
Do you ever think about that when you're singing? Obviously, it's been so many years, of course, since the first time that you sang it, but does it ever make you emotional when you perform it? That if you ever let it cross your mind, just how important that was in changing your life?
It can do, absolutely. And when we turned up, it was an evening session. And unfortunately, the engineer was a very good engineer and had a lot of hits, but he'd been at a wedding all day and he was blind drunk and very, very aggressive. And I didn't think we were even going to get through the session. After 20 minutes in that studio, I thought, this is my first session in a professional studio. I thought, this is not for me because we have the headphones on. This guy's screaming really, really aggressive, vulgar things. I don't know how much I can take of this. But luckily, he collapsed and we had to carry him out of the studio and put him in a black London taxi cab. I never saw him again and his assistant took over, who was called Gus Dudgeon. And it was Gus's first session, and it was our first session. He never forgot that. And he went on to produce all of Elton's early albums. If you look up his early albums, they were all produced by Gus Dudgeon. He worked with David Bowie, Kiki D, and many, many big artists later in life. But his first session was with us, recording She's Not There.
That's a great story. Well, Colin, thank you so much for joining me on the Sweet Song podcast, and best of luck to you still out there performing. And I hope we get to see you again soon.
Okay, Kristi, it's great to talk to you. And absolutely, I do hope I get back to the States soon. And hopefully we can get a chat when I come down your way. That would be fantastic.
Great. Take care and be in good health.
Okay, you too.
Todd and the guys too. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye.